Hey everybody, I'm Dave Cicimurri. I'm the Curator of Natural History. Welcome back to the South Carolina State Museum and another Fossil Friday. Today we are going to talk about fossil ground sloths. Not the little cute tree sloths that we have today in Central and South America. We're talking about their extinct relatives, sloths that were taller than our ceiling down here. And in South Carolina we had several different kinds of giant sloths. And I've got two different species here in front of me. And what I tried to do to kind of give you an idea of the size range, because these giant ground sloths, some were smaller than others, some were larger than others, is the bones that you see. If we have a finger bone of one, we have the same or similar finger bone of the other, and that should give you an idea of scale. So we've got sloths of two different ages. One, it's called Megalonyx jeffersoni, and the fossils we have of that particular species are around 450,000 years old. And they were collected from a site near Harleyville in South Carolina in Dorchester County. We also have, that's this guy here, Megalonyx jeffersoni. Now we've got these bones here, these kind of cream-colored ones with the rusty red color. Those are Erymatherium eomigrans. That's another sloth. That's what the biggest one we have actually in South Carolina. And these came from a site in Somerville, also in Dorchester County. And these bones are around 2.5 million years old or so. So when you look at this arrangement of bones, we've got everywhere from foot bones and finger bones and some vertebrae. So I'll go through and just give you an idea of what each of these pieces are, where they were in the body, and then again you can see just by the size how big one was versus the other. So we start off on my left over here. In the background we have two thoracic vertebrae. These are located in the back, so if you kind of run your finger down the middle of your back, you can feel these little bumps. That's what this is up here. This is the neural spine. And the pieces that come off of the side here, along with the central part, which is called the centrum, is where the ribs connect. So if you feel the ribs in the front of your body, they wrap around and connect to your thoracic vertebrae. So that's where these were, in the back of Erymatherium and the back of Megalonyx. In front of those, we have a couple of claws. The larger claw is from Erymatherium, and then the smaller one is from Megalonyx. These animals were herbivores, but they actually did have very large claws on their hands and feet. And one of the thoughts is that maybe they're using these big claws as defensive weapons to fend off saber cats or American lions or maybe dire wolves. But also maybe they're reaching up into branches and pulling the branch down so that they can grab it with their tongue and their teeth to strip the branches and the leaves, things that they are eating. So directly in front of me now we have a couple of bones from the hand, about this part of the hand. And again you can see how much bigger Erymatherium was compared to Megalonyx. And this ridge right here is actually where another bone connects, and eventually at the very end of the finger you have the claw. And so the claw is actually equivalent to the tip of your finger here, and we have a fingernail that covers the kind of outer surface of our finger. And in ground sloths, very much like your cat or your dog, they had a nail that covered the entire claw except for the back end where it connects to the other bones. In front of that we have a tooth of Erymatherium and then a tooth of Megalonyx, and again you can see how much bigger Erymatherium was versus Megalonyx. And you can tell a little bit about what these guys were eating based on their tooth shape, and you can look at microscopic wear patterns and figure out how the mouth is moving when they're chewing their food. And what's neat about these giant sloths is that their teeth always grew. So the teeth are always growing, they're keeping pace with wear. So rather than with humans, we have our baby teeth and then our permanent set. That permanent set, once that comes in as teenagers, we have to brush our teeth and floss to keep those teeth for the rest of our life. But with sloths, they're always growing more tooth, so as the tooth wears down, there's more that's forming, and that lasts for its entire life. We don't know how long they lived, but we may be able to tell that later on as we figure out more analytical techniques. We can look at what the temperature and the moisture was like when these things were alive. So there's a lot we can do as we have more analytical techniques. So finally, on this little black mat here, we've got a couple of heel bones. So this is Megalonyx jeffersoni, this is Erymatherium, and this is the calcaneum, it's called. It's the heel bone. So with humans, we walk heel to toe. So when you step, you put your heel down and then your toes come down. This is the heel bone of those animals, and depending on the shape, we can tell what the shape of the foot for these giant ground sloths look like. And some of them looks like they walked on the sides of their feet, and others not so much. So there's a lot we can tell. from just these individual bones, not just the size of the animal, but how they chewed their food, how they maybe grabbed their food, how they walked. So if we move on over further to my right, we do have actually a skull of Megalonyx jeffersoni, and this skull is actually still in the jacket that it was collected in. So the jacket is a plaster shell. So when we found the fossil, if you look closely, you can see it's very cracked. And rather than just pulling this skull up out of the ground and risk breaking it because it's already broken and making it more difficult for us when we're back in the lab to put it back together, we try and keep it as intact as possible out of the ground and bring it back to the lab that way. So to do that, we make a plaster shell around it that maintains the integrity. We bring it back to the lab, and then we've slowly been removing the sediment or the matrix that is surrounding the skull. So you can see the teeth that are along the roof of the mouth here. Those are, we call them molariform teeth. Those are equivalent to maybe our molars. They're not exactly molars. Molariform is what that means. It's like a molar. And then this big tooth here is a caniniform, similar in position to what our canines are, our eye teeth in our mouth. And again, you can see these teeth, they don't have any enamel on them like ours do, which is weird. Most mammals have enamel covering their teeth. Enamel is nice and hard. Dentine is rather soft, which again is why sloth teeth always grow, because they are easily worn down. So after probably another many hours of work, we will eventually want to flip this skull over so we can finish preparing the other side. So it's only really about halfway done as far as the preparation. So there are a lot of other things we can learn from giant sloths. So what I like to do is show you a few other parts that we've got and tell you a bit about those. We're back, and here I am in front of a set of sloth hips, or the sloth pelvis. This is a giant ground sloth here, and like we saw with the sloth skull, is this came out of the ground in a jacket, in a big protective shell. And you can see how fractured it is. So we wanted to make sure we could get it out of the ground as intact as possible and back to the museum as much in one piece as we could, rather than pulling it out piece by piece and trying to put it back together later. The overall, when you look at this pelvis, you can see it's upside down actually. So what you're looking at is if the animal was on its back and you were looking at the belly, that's what we're seeing here. And so these big flat bones up in the front are called the ilia. And if you put your hands on your hips, that's the part of your pelvis you put your hands on, is the ilium. And what's neat about this are a few things. Is one is there's this line of bones down the center, part of the spine. It's called the sacrum. And the sacrum is what connects the rest of our spine to our hips. So this portion coming out towards you here would be going towards the head, and then on my end, it's coming towards the tail. And on this one, it only has 4 vertebrae. So there are only 4 vertebrae in the sacrum. If we count them out, 1, 2, 3, 4. If we look back here, you can see this big bridge of bone made up of the pubis on the right and left sides. And you can see they're fused together right here, and it's this nice solid bridge of bone. That kind of contrasts with the pelvis we have here to my left. So if we wander on over this way, we can see that this one overall very similar, maybe a little more gracile, we'd say, a little bit more delicate looking than the other one, but overall very similar. So we've got the big plates of bone on the front called the ilia, you have the pubis here, and then the sacrum right down the center. On this one, it's a little bit different in that there are 5 sacral vertebrae, and we can count those out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the pubis right here is open. So the pubes, the right and left sides, don't come together, and there's actually cartilage in between. So my hypothesis is that this represents a female, and that you've got 5 vertebrae in the sacrum to maybe have more room for a developing fetus, and then the pubes are not fused together, so maybe there's some flexibility so that when the baby's being born, the baby can pass through the birth canal a little bit easier. So if we walk back over to the male then, there might be less area in the abdominal cavity for a developing fetus. So that's what I'm thinking. And overall, this is much more robust. The way we would know for sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is if we could find a pregnant female, and we can compare her pelvis to these two here, and then we'd know for sure one or the other. If we look in the center now, we have another sacrum, and this one is oriented as if you were looking at the back of the animal. And it actually is composed of 4 vertebrae, so maybe then that represents a male, just like the one that we see here off to my right. Now, if I pick this bone up here, this is one of the ilia, and what's neat about sloth pelvis is that their bones don't necessarily all fuse up. So the right and left sides of the pelvis are made up of 3 bones each, the ilium, the ischium, and another bone called the pubis. And this is the ilium here. So if I look right here, this surface that you're looking at, it's an articular surface. It's where the sacrum connects, and that's what connects then our spine to the hips. If I rotate it a little bit back this way, you can see some other articular surfaces here for the pubis and the ischium, and then right back over here, that is actually part of the acetabulum. That's where the femur or the thigh bone connects to the hips. We'll put this down. We come back over here, you can see this section right here is where the thigh bone or the femur for this sloth would connect right there. So we've learned a lot about giant ground sloths today. Thanks for joining us. You can follow us, keep track of what we're doing. If you have a question or a comment, please leave it. And if you have the time, come back next time and see what we have to talk about. Thanks for joining us.